Alright, hello and welcome. My name is Jason Welsh, and today I'm going to be covering the equipment that I have in my lab. So these are the things that have kind of been the most used things that I use in my workflow. That way, if you're interested in getting into this as far as a hobby is concerned, you're not buying a lot of things that don't work. So one of the things I love in my workflow is this thing right here, 6-inch buffer. I think I pointed this out in a video before. This is amazing. I use it. It's been with me 3 or 4 years. I haven't replaced it yet. I use it every day, and I use polishing compound with it. Okay. Great piece of equipment by Harbor Freight. Like $60. You can't beat it. Personal protection. Can't say enough. If you're using any kind of wheel that has rouge, like that buffer wheel, you can use standard protection, but I use a lot of chemicals in my lab, so I just got one of these, and I'll tell you what, I've had this one about 3-4 years, but I would say I would never go with anything less. It's cool, it makes me look like Pink Darth Vader, and I like it. These are the goggles I use. Anti-fog. Alright. Six-inch wire wheel with extra fine wire wheels on the one side. Now, I'll point out my safety gear here in a second, but I would say definitely wear, and I'll show you the goggles that I wear with this, because one thing about this is you shouldn't take the side off. I'm kind of a daredevil. I don't like the side on, because when a ring goes in here, it gets trapped and then dies. With this, at least it spins off. It hits me every once in a while, but I'm okay with that, as long as I'm wearing good eye protection. So, 6-inch wire wheel. This brand is really good, never overheats, and runs for hours. Circular saw. Okay, one of the things I wish somebody had told me a long time ago is how to cut copper pipe. You can cut copper pipe with a 60 tooth circular saw. Okay? I use a cheap 60-inch or 60 teeth because you go through them every once in a while. Really haven't replaced it. It makes a hell of a noise, but it cuts just like butter. So if you are sick of cutting copper pipe using that little thing that goes around, yeah, throw that out if you're doing high production, and get yourself a circular saw. Betsy. I pointed out this one enough, I think. I use this all the time. So I got a video on how to modify it to hold 4-inch PVC. And yeah, I would say I use this all the time in my workflow. Tumbler chemicals. So one of the things I use all the time is Lemon Shine. Okay, so that's been an update lately. Lemon Shine is so cool. I don't know what's in this stuff. Lemon and some other things, but not listed. This works really good for taking everything off your ring as far as chemicals are concerned. So you put this in your tumbler along with stainless steel shot. So that, and 1 or 2 drops of Dawn dish soap. So these are my main tumbler chemicals that I've been using lately. Here's a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, I have this coming out of my bath. It's salmon color, which is fine. I don't use brightener, but see how it's got the details that wrap around? So, in this case, This is probably my most used piece of equipment ever. Dremel. Lots of wire wheel bits. Okay, again, Harbor Freight has these. This is the Dremel version. I can't express how much I despise Dremel bits, but yeah, these things I go through so many of these compared to the Harbor Freight ones. Harbor Freight, like, and again, this is like $6 for this thing, and I go through them a lot. With the Harbor Freight ones, I can go through them, I can do all kinds of crazy with those, and they never wear down. So pieces like this, for example, is what I would polish up using the Dremel. Pieces like this, I would do the Dremel. But rings and everything else, I would use a wire wheel and then a polisher. At the very end, that's when I stick them in a tumbler. So usually, sometimes, in most cases, I'll go here first, in smaller, then here, then tumbler. If it's a ring, I'll go here, then here, then tumbler. Cool. Current power supplies. Dr. Meter, 3 amp. Use that for my larger tank. Tank presently is made out of cooler. I find that the cooler, I don't know why it is the plastic around the outside edge limits crystal growth. So these coolers are pretty amazing when it comes down to using them as electroforming tanks. And they're easy to see the bottom, see, because they're white. Yeah. So I got a little one. This one, I actually had the wires wrapped around. It's being ran by this, not a power supply. This I will put a link to in the show notes, description below. This is my power supply running that tank, and I tell you what, I like it. I love this thing. When I first got it, I was like, oh, this thing sucks. But then within about 3 or 4 weeks, I started to see a lot better quality. It was actually my quality of my tank, not the power supply. So this has the ability to, let's say I want to switch it over to volts, switch it over to amps. If I want to up the amps, I can. If I want to lower the amps, I can. Cool. And what's nice about it is, let's say I want it that's off, on. Pretty simple, right? The only thing I don't like about it, it doesn't show amps and volts together. So it gets kind of, that's, if you're used to using the bigger power supply over there and you're stepping down, it takes a little bit longer to get used to this. But this was, I think, $18, and then the other one over there was $120. So that's the difference between what I'm running. This needs an external power supply, so if you have a lot of wall warts or power supplies laying around, you can use that. In this case, I'm using this 24 volts, 2.7 amps. I just had this laying around. So if you have a lot of these laying around, buy yourself one of these. If you don't, get yourself the other thing. Maybe. Alright, one of the things I use all the time as far as the tank is concerned too, so I'm going to classify this as equipment, is this tank. This tank is used to, here's a ring with fire scale on it. You can see the fire scale. It's kind of a darker color. When you go to electroform onto fire scale, it gets a really wonky texture. It's not really all that pleasant. So I like to strip the fire scale off before I electroform. How I do that is a piece of stainless steel. Doesn't matter, you can have a fork in there or a knife. I just have this big chunk of stainless steel and a piece of copper. And what you do is you hook this to a hook of some nature. I'm working with one hand here. Lower down in there. You add 5 volts. Your positive goes here, your negative goes here. Between 4 volts and 5 volts, what it'll do, it'll strip the fire scale right off of that using sodium bisulfate, pH minus in your pool aisle. So this, again, this is part of my workflow that's kind of survived 3 or 4 years. I go back to this tank all the time, so I wanted to include it within my major stuff I use all the time. So there's about 2 gallons of water there, and there's no scientific, formula for this, but I would say I use about that much sodium bisulfate. And this is a 20-ounce container. So, yeah. About 5 ounces, maybe? Yeah, about 5 ounces. Again, you can't screw it up. There's no way. So, very cool. Get yourself that tank. It'll help you if you're getting fire scale on your stuff. So after a few minutes in that bath, this is what they look like. So you've seen the fire scale one, and I just happened to take a batch out, so I wanted to show you what it looked like. Nice, all ready to electroform. Torch. Okay, you can get all kinds of cool stuff going with a torch, especially with copper. You can melt it to each other, you can solder with it, you can do everything. Torch, oxyacetylene torch. And my bad, don't go oxyacetylene, go propane oxygen if you're going to go that route. Propane oxygen. The oxyacetylene oxygen mix is too strong with copper. It just absolutely annihilates it. It's very hard to control it. With propane and oxygen, I can get really fine melting going on. I can do really nice soldering with it. Heating up large pieces of copper. This right here, and propane mix. I got tired of buying propane tanks, those little guys. Screw that. This is my propane torch. TIG welder. That's the TIG welder I use. With this I can TIG weld 16 gauge wire. I don't solder anymore, I TIG weld. So when you get down to your ring phase, if you're making shanks, I will just TIG weld these together. Little trick is overlapping them like this. So here's a good example of patina that has crawled up on a crystal, and I need to clean it off the crystal somehow. Now, I could toothbrush it off, or I could scrape it off, but this comes into mind where I would use a piece of equipment that you might not have, but might think about getting if you're into patinas, or getting stuff off of crystals without hurting them. So, sandblasting. Using walnut shell. Okay, walnut shell. So, what I do is I just put this thing in here so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to turn on magical pump and I'm going to sandblast it and then show you the results of that. Alright, so here's the example of after it's been sandblasted with walnut shell. And you can see that all the remnants of the patina around the crystal has been removed. Now you can use maybe a different patina around the crystal. So the blue patina really likes cracks and crevices, but it's so bright that it kind of is distracting away from the crystal. Sometimes I'll use the blue mixed within the black, but a good way to kind of like mix patinas together and still have that film that gets put on top of the crystal to be removed is with walnut shell. So just wanted to share that with you. Harbor Freight has that. It's, I don't know, I think it's like $200, but I use it for other things besides making jewelry. It's good for removing rust. It's good for polishing things. Yeah, all in all, removing small particles of paint from things. It's a good universal tool. Alright, so for my last two things I want to cover, I want to cover laser cutter. Okay, wow, I can't say enough about laser cutters as far as universal to all hobbies, because really when it comes down to it, you can make all your displays with a laser cutter. So things that you can display your earrings, your necklaces, you can cut out little racks. Awesome tool. Okay, it's like universal tool. Coat hooks for your wife. It doesn't really matter what you want to make, but yeah. Full spectrum laser cutter works pretty good. It's low, inexpensive, and it cuts up to a 1/4 inch acrylic. Okay, so what can you do with that? Well, think about any shape. So this is 16th of an inch acrylic. Then you paint it with Krylon flat black plastic primer. Then you paint it with electroforming paint. Then you dip it in your tank and you get it coated with copper, and then you can mount it for signs. Takes a little while to get the letters down, you know, like growing, but yeah, copper coated letters. And of course you can get Celtic design necklaces, you can get bird shapes, whatever you think about, whatever shape you want to cut out. It's pretty detailed. Okay, the other one, 3D printing. Okay, can't say enough about 3D printing. It's saved me so many times. This requires a little bit of a learning curve though, so you know, I mean, if you really want to get down the get lost into things for a while curve, 3D printing is a good veer off your path and get lost for a while, so it's cool. I'm glad I added it to my collection of things I know. So what you do is you 3D print an object, and then you make a mold of that object. Okay. So this is the mold for that raven skull. This is a smaller version. Then what you do is you pour wax into the mold, and let's say you screw up. You can't screw up. Anytime you screw up, you just take the wax, throw it back into the batch of wax, and it becomes wax again. So it's inexpensive because there's no waste. Then you paint over the top of it with the electroforming paint, and then you coat it with a thin layer of copper in your electroforming bath. And then when it gets to a point where it has a thin layer, you take it and you can use a heat gun or a torch, and you get it hot and it drains all the wax out of it, because the wax is kind of heavy. It doesn't weigh a whole lot, but if you leave the wax in there, and let's say the person put this in their car, it would start bleeding wax. Or if they're in the shower for too long, it would start bleeding wax. So you want to get the wax out of it. And then after that's done, you can mount all your stones to it and then throw it back in the bath for the last half to envelop all the stones. Cool. So that's all I have for that. But hopefully I could inspire a few people to like think about, you know, like how other things can tie into this hobby, or how this hobby can tie into other things. So that back and forth motion of, being creative really does spawn a few things that, like I really love to see inside the community. So I hope you enjoy and have fun.